Sarah Langley Derby and Her Journey to Change Women's Education by Leo Anderson and Evan Williams.
Sarah Derby grew up in Hingham, Massachusetts, with a life of no education and wanted to seek change. When Sarah was a girl, there were public schools for boys, but there was no public schools for girls until she was 53 years old. Occasionally, there was what was called a dame school, taught by ladies of the town for girls. In these, reading, writing, and needlework were taught, but nothing close to the education that boys were receiving.
Sarah lived a normal life as a child, loving to picnic and spend time on her father's islands in the harbor. She was so familiar with the islands in that area, and everyone knew this, so the first cartographers in the area listed them as Ragged, Sarah, and Langley. Women during the time of Sarah Langley were not treated as equal as men, and were lucky to receive any sort of education. To the woman from a century ago, the reality that 11.7 million women started college in America in 2016, a majority of the total number of new students, would seem like a miracle, and they would not believe it.
Although Sarah Derby never received an education growing up, she took great interest in the educational systems of her times. She frequently engaged in constant discussions with community leaders about how girls were never given a true education or an education at all, and knew it must be changed. Few girls attended formal schools during Derby's time, but most were able to get some education.
In 1772, Derby was 58, childless, and twice widowed. She decided to work with the leading men of Hingham to address her educational concerns of girls not receiving true educational opportunities by deeding a parcel of land on the main street of Hingham for the location of a coeducational school. Since she was always intrigued with Hingham and always had wanted rights for women to receive an education, she knew she had to take action. When her husband passed, she gained lots of wealth, which she used to open up Derby Academy so that both boys and girls could have an education. Showing that her interest in women's education created attention to the topic. When Sarah opened up the school, the attention grew even wider.
On April 6, 1791, the Derby School opens its doors in Hingham, Massachusetts, founded by Sarah Langley Derby. Derby Academy valued the principles of the idea of providing educational through partnerships with the town leaders, the goal of providing the means of financial assistance, and the vision of providing valuable education available to both boys and girls. Derby Academy was one of the very early coeducational schools of the country. Although the classes were separated by gender until 1852, and the girls and boys studied in slightly different curriculum, but the same teachers instructed all the students. So they were all receiving the same teaching tactics and were both being provided with education, which was a huge step in history.
When Sarah Derby made her will, she required Derby Academy to provide money for clothing and supplying school books, showing her devotion for the children's education, and how Derby Academy gave the opportunity for women to be educated. Finally, there was an opportunity for girls at age 9 to learn reading, writing, English, French, arithmetic, and needlework, together with boys. By 1739, around 80 to 90 boys and girls were attending, showing the major jump in opportunity for girls' education that Derby Academy provided.
Women in America never truly received an education before this, showing how the creation of Derby Academy broke barriers in history. Few women gained access to higher education, but it was solely for the reason so that they could become educators for their sons, who were seen as the future, or for their daughters, so that they can become educators for future generations. Sarah Langley did not believe in this, and knew there must be a change, which was a major influence towards opening the school.
So right now we're standing outside Derby Academy. It has since been renovated and turned into the Hingham Historical Society. Now that we're inside, we can take a look around. Over the years, the building has been updated and improved, but the structure has remained the same. The room we're in right now is the gift shop, but it used to be a meeting area. Now that we're upstairs, we can check out what the classrooms look like. The main classroom inside here has since been turned into a display gallery. Up here above the door frame, you can see the original emblem. Another classroom has been turned into a gallery. And we can see Sarah Derby's painting on the wall over here.
Derby Academy was ultimately successful thanks to Sarah Derby's commitment to growing and supporting the school. Derby's commitment to success led her to devote her life and afterlife wholeheartedly to opportunities and funding. Her will required the new school to provide money for clothing and supplying with school books. Such poor scholars in the town as shall be admitted into the school, as the trustees in their wisdom shall think fit objects of this charity.
To the town's desire to introduce a college preparatory school, the academy fit perfectly into the changing times. As said in Tony Catanella's The History of Derby Academy, it seemed that if there were any opportunity to establish a sound college preparatory school in the town, independent of taxation or the vote of the townsmen, it should be taken. Thanks to Derby's strong reputation, people believed in her vision and were willing to support, economically and socially. Deprived by her sex of an education that was open to boys of her generation, her wealth and social position now made it possible for her to take steps to set an example for future generations. Sarah Derby's impact on American and female education is unmatched. The devotion of her career, interest in women's education, and the creation of Derby Academy created a drastic change on the perception of who belonged in the college preparatory schools throughout early America. Without Derby, there would be a substantial difference in the way Americans look at education and who is given the opportunity to learn.
Sarah Langley Derby shaped the way that women would be treated towards education in the future. Her opening of Derby Academy in Hingham, Massachusetts, influenced many other schools to turn to or open up as coeducational, which broke barriers in history. Millions of women in today's America now receive an education, and the process could have been much slower if it wasn't for the devotion of Sarah Derby.
The legend of Ragged Sarah Langley, a revolutionary girl in pre-revolutionary times. Not all has changed. A life history of Hingham. History of Hingham, Mass. History of the town of Hingham. History of Derby Academy. Sarah Derby, the story of a colonial innkeeper's daughter. The history of Derby Academy. Notable women and their public roles in the early 1800s. Here's how women fought for the right to be educated throughout history. 3 centuries of educational leadership. The history of women in education.